Alright, look, you've clicked on the video with its admittedly clickbaity title, but what I'm about to say is the opposite of clickbait. It's click, repulse. Here it is. The checklist mentality will kill you. And it's something that's extremely prevalent in the whitewater community. I'm mainly looking at you, intermediate paddlers. And so in this video, I am going to explain what the checklist mentality is, why it's bad, and what we can do to do better. First, a disclaimer. I am not an expert. I am not an expert, and this video is an opinion piece. Nothing I say here is a hard and fast rule. They're just guidelines. I'm also not responsible for any dangers or harm that might come from this video, so please don't sue me. I have no money. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about this checklist mentality. Think of lists that you see in everyday life. You come home from school, you have a homework list. You go to IKEA and buy a chair, you have a list of parts. And when you go to the grocery store, you have a shopping list. So let's take that shopping list from the grocery store. And as you're walking through the aisles, you start checking the ingredients off one by one by one. Then you take those ingredients home and you have another list, a list of steps. Follow the steps to that list, to that recipe, and congratulations, you have spaghetti and meatballs now, yay. With the checklist mentality, Whitewater is the same. Take that grocery list and replace the ingredients with rivers. And then just order those rivers by level of difficulty, just like the steps to a recipe. As you run these rivers, the list gets checked off one by one as you progress from harder to harder to harder rivers, until eventually you have a recipe for your ultimate river. And so to summarize, this list of whitewater rivers ordered in difficulty with each one serving as a step to the next is what we call the checklist mentality. Got it? Cool. Don't do this. The problem isn't the list itself. There's nothing inherently wrong with having a list of cool rivers. The problem is when that list gets turned into a recipe. Whitewater is not a recipe, and rivers should not be used as steps. Actually, let me take that last part back. Rivers should be used as steps, but with extreme caution. Otherwise, you run the risk of two major downfalls. One, testing to failure, and two, false preparedness. Testing to failure is exactly what it sounds like. Testing or trying or attempting something until failure when you can't do it anymore. You can do this with weightlifting. Just keep putting weight on the bar until you can't pick it up anymore. You can do this with video games. Just keep playing harder and harder levels until you get a game over. And you can do these things because the consequences are essentially non-existent. In a video game, you just reload a save. And in weightlifting, you just can't pick up the weight anymore. Or you have a spotter, which if you're like, hey Jer, I don't have a spotter, go get a spotter. The consequences in whitewater, however, are real. Testing to failure in a whitewater environment means that you are testing until you can no longer control the boat. This opens you up to risk of serious injury or death. Now I get it, shit happens, people have bad days. Hell, I've had bad days. But that's not what this video is about. Here's an example of a typical Southeast River checklist. Now I realize not everyone is going to be familiar with these rivers, but for the sake of this argument, just pretend. Use your imagination. A boater following this checklist is going to run the rivers in this order. The ultimate goal, the ultimate river here, is the Green Narrows, which is a respectable run. That boater, let's call him Jer Jr., successfully runs the Upper Green. So he goes to the next river on the list, Big Laurel, and successfully runs that. And then goes to the next one, Wilson, and is successful again. So now he's ready for Watauga, right? Well, not necessarily. Just because Jer Jr. successfully ran the previous level does not mean he's ready for the next. After all, what exactly is a successful run? To some boaters, success is hitting clean lines. To others, success is not swimming. And still to others, success is simply not dying. So let's re-examine Jared Jr. here. He did not die on the upper green. He did not die on Big Laurel. And he did not die on Wilson. So now, he is ready to not die on Watauga. Sounds pretty bad, doesn't it? But it gets worse, because if Jared Jr. doesn't die on Watauga, then that means he's ready for the Green Narrows. After all, he hasn't reached his limit yet. By testing till failure, Jared Jr. is continually putting himself in riskier and riskier situations, until eventually, inevitably, he will fail and something bad happens. Not failing on the previous river does not equate to being ready for the next, which brings me to the next major downfall: false preparedness. By following the checklist, Jared Jr. has falsely assumed that he is ready for the next river, when in reality, he may be far from it. Jared Jr. mistakenly believes that completing the previous step is enough to get to the next step. Whitewater is a downhill sport. Given enough luck, anyone can fall down a river. The true test comes in whether or not you can stay in complete control all the way down that river. Jared Jr. might have an amazing roll, and so in Class 2 and Class 3, Jared Jr. looks amazing. In every circumstance, he rolls up. Maybe he can't hold a line, or maybe his paddling form is terrible, or maybe he just runs the whole rapid on his face. But at the end, he rolls up smiling and completes the run. So it doesn't matter. Until it does. At a certain point, being out of control is no longer advisable, and actually can be downright fatal. Real preparedness comes with practice and training. In any other sport, people train for hours, days, even years, just for the chance to win against their opponent. And if they beat that opponent, they go right back to training. Just because they beat opponent number 1 doesn't mean they're ready to take on harder opponent number 2. It's the practice and training that counts, not whoever their previous opponent was. So imagine if your favorite sports team never practiced, if they just assumed that beating their last opponent was enough to beat the next. They would suck. Whitewater is the same. If you never practice and you just assume that your previous river prepares you for the next one, then you also suck. Now you may have noticed there's some overlap between testing till failure and false preparedness, and that's because there is. And that's where the real danger lies. By following the checklist mentality and thus assuming that the previous river is enough prep for the next and going until we can't go anymore, we've actually not created a recipe for success, but for disaster. So how do we fix this? We can start by changing how we view the checklist. Instead of viewing rivers as an item to be checked off, let's view them as exams or performances. Exams and performances require studying and practice. They are there to demonstrate mastery of the topic. And so each item, each river on the list becomes an exam to master, a performance to perfect before moving on to the next one. This means working the basics like ferries and eddies and peel-outs on the current level before moving on to the next. Hit challenge lines, surf stuff, attain, train, practice. Test yourself not until failure, but until you can't fail. And practice not till you think you're prepared, but until you know you're prepared. And so with these changes, hopefully we can encourage a safer form of progression. And so if you don't retain anything from this video, I only ask that you remember this. Checklist mentality, bad. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Bye now.